We are recording the interview of Terrance Sarul. This interview is being conducted by David Barry from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the Holiday Inn Hotel in Fairborn, Ohio. It is 10 a.m. on June 8th, 2019. Why don't we start with where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in South Bend, Indiana on February 12th, 1950, and lived there all my life other than my experience in the military. 4 years in the military. I've lived there all my life.
And who were your parents and what were their occupation?
Well, my father was Joseph R. Sarul. He worked in the foundries in South Bend at Studebaker Foundries, and Studebakers went out of business, and he ended up at the Cummins Diesel Foundries. Passed away a few years ago. He was a World War II veteran, Marine Corps, through the Pacific Islands. So he had quite an experience, but didn't discuss much of it with me. I guess it was a big secret, or he just didn't want to talk about it. My mom was Florence, and she did all kinds of various jobs throughout her career, from truck driver to steel mills to you name it. She did a little bit of everything, and she passed away a few years ago also.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I didn't have any full brothers and sisters. I had half brothers and half sisters. I have 2 half sisters and 1 half brother from my mom's other marriages. But we still keep in contact. I still keep in contact with all 3 of them. 2 live locally, and 1 lives up in, my half sister lives up in northern Michigan.
Did any of your family members serve, or outside of your father, did any of your family members serve in the military?
My brother, my half brother, I don't know if it's a half brother or step brother, but I don't know how that all works out. But my half brother was in the Navy. He was prior to Vietnam. He's a little bit older than me, and that's it.
And what were you doing before you joined the military?
From an occupational standpoint,
Sure.
I was working in a wholesale drug company in the computer department, and there wasn't a whole lot of future, I thought, at that point, working there. I could see where it wasn't going to be beneficial for me to continue working there. Did not finish college, so it was kind of like a dead-end job. And would you like me to go into how I left there and joined the military? I can go there.
Yeah.
Out of high school, I went to Indiana State University for a year. Quit school, got married, had a baby girl, and then began my career back in South Bend with this wholesale drug company. But even though I had a wife and child, the draft was going pretty heavy in 1969, 1970, and my number came up. The number came up because I lost my student status deferment after I quit in Indiana State. So I went for my physical to Chicago for the Army. Physical was good. Got my greetings letter from the President of the United States, welcoming me to the military, and had a report date of July 30th, 1970. Well, I didn't want to go into the Army, and ever since I was a little 6-year-old, airplanes were my thing. Loved them. I still have a report from the 6th grade of how I was going to make my career in aviation. Still have that. Handwriting's not so great, but I still have that. But anyway, I thought, well, if I'm going to have to go into the military, I surely didn't want to go into the Army because I was going to be on the ground in Vietnam. And so I convinced my wife that I'll give up 2 years of a drafted into the Army, in favor of 4 years in the Air Force. A, it satisfied my desire to be around aircraft. B, my chances of staying out of Vietnam were so much better. And so I convinced her of that. 2 years versus 4 years, okay, I can deal with that. So I joined I went down to the recruiter with my friend who was in the same dead-end job that I was, Neil. Neil says, oh, so you're going down and joining the Air Force? Neil says, yes, I'm going down with you. And so we went down and joined together. And like I said, the Army had me through the draft on July 30th, 1970, and I joined the Air Force on July 29th, 1970, the day before. And I asked the recruiter, I said, this legal? He said, oh yeah, we do it all the time. So that's how I started my Air Force career, why I joined the Air Force, to stay out of the Army and to stay out of Vietnam.
How did your family feel about you joining the military, especially your wife, brother, and
Well, my wife knew I wasn't going to dodge the draft. I wasn't going to pack my bags and go to Canada. I wasn't going to stand out on a street corner and burn my draft card, refuse to go. She knew I was going to go. So at that point, the real issue was 2 years in the Army versus 4 years in the Air Force. It was a time issue. But in the end, she could see where it was probably the better decision. As far as my mom and dad, there was no real leaning one way or another. I guess my dad thought that was a good thing since he was a Marine veteran. He surely wouldn't have wanted to see me go to Canada or dodge the draft, so they were okay with it. But mainly it was my wife I had to convince, and she knew I was going to go in regardless. Which one I was going to go into at that point was the big question.
so you have a love for aircraft. You decide to go to the Air Force, sign up the day before you're supposed to be drafted into the Army. How long until you go to your basic training?
I can't remember the exact date, but I was there in the hottest period. I felt the hottest period of San Antonio, Texas. Got sent to Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas. I can't remember the exact date I got there. All I know, it was hot, hot, hot. And spent 6 weeks in San Antonio. I dealt with it. You know, it was difficult, but it could have been a lot harder. But thought I did pretty good getting through. Again, I can't remember the exact dates. I'm thinking it was like probably August, September, you know, and all I remember a lot from mostly from the basic training is the heat of San Antonio with the red flag flying. The red flag meaning you were under high heat conditions, and your PT and whatnot had to be restricted at that point. But other than the structure and getting yelled at every once in a while by your TI, I didn't mind it. It was okay. I mean, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was like, okay, this is part of the deal, and I'll get through it.
So were you able to choose your job then before basic training, or did you get selected at basic training?
When I was going in, the only thing you got to choose was, and you really didn't get to choose that because you tested out. And however your test scores came out, that's where you were going to go into a general category major field. So you could either go into electronics if you tested out. If your test showed mechanical, that's where you were going to go into. It was a general category, If you didn't qualify for any of those two, they threw you into what they call the general category, which could include anything from a security police to a cook. So I took my tests, and my area showed you're going to go mechanical. I said, okay, I can do mechanical. As far as a job, no. Nowadays I understand it's a lot different. You can ask for certain jobs. If you qualify for certain jobs, you'll get those jobs. No, back in those days, you went in and it could be a crapshoot as long as it was within that major field. Once you get down into basic training, at some point, and 6 weeks of basic training, at some point, maybe 2-3 weeks into basic training, they pile everybody into this auditorium, and they have different people with specific jobs give their little seminars, give their little spiels, because you could choose at that point which direction you might want to go into. It could be anything from these 3 guys that were like supermen coming in and asking you if you think you can qualify to be a PJ, which is a parajumper. These were the equivalent to Navy SEALs or Army Rangers. And if you thought you could qualify swimming 500 miles across the ocean or whatever their requirements were, you filtered off into their little group and you signed up to be a PJ or whatever the spiel was at the time. And the big push at that point in time in 1970 was the Vietnam War, obviously. And the guy with the biggest presentation was representing the 462 AFSC field, which is weapons mechanics, weapons maintenance. And of course, they gave you this line about, gee whiz, if you don't go this, you might become a cook or something. Basic training was a lot of brainwashing, and they steered you in certain directions where they wanted you to go at that time. Well, you're in basic training and you don't know anything. You don't know where you're going to be tomorrow. You don't know what you're going to do tomorrow. You don't know what you're going to do in the future. So they worked your mind pretty good as far as steering you in the right direction, only because as a recruit boot, any information is good information. Anything that had any substance of, that gives me the real stuff that I need to know of what I want to do, they worked your mind really good. So they would talk in terms of, if you don't do this, you might get that. And you didn't want that, so you went ahead and did this. So I signed up for 462 weapons mechanics. I thought, well, at least, I walked out of there thinking, this is good. At least I know what I'm going to do now for the next 4 years. And believe it or not, that's pretty important at that point in time. Just having some direction of what you're going to do. So I walked out pretty good. I knew it wasn't going to be something I could use outside of the military, because unless United Airlines was going to start loading bombs onto the wings of their 707 airliners. But at least it was something that I could hang my hat on and say, and write home, say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Unlike today's a lot different. Before you sign them papers, you have a pretty dang good idea of what you're going to do. And back then, you didn't. So there I am. I signed the paperwork. That's how I became a weapons maintenance mechanic and weapons loader. And it was, again, just to feel that I knew what I was going to do for the next 4 years. So that's how I did it.
And where did you go for training for that?
After the 6 weeks of boot camp, I went to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado. That's where all the 462, 461s went to learn their craft. That was 3 months of training. probably September through December. So that kind of gives you a timeline of where I'm at from joining on July 30th or July 29th. I'm now at Lowry Air Force Base from September through December, learning the craft of loading bombs and missiles on fighter jets and bombers, and really good experience. I loved Denver. I loved the area. September through December, the weather can be really fickle in Denver. I love that aspect of it. One day you could be standing out for formation, ready to go to school, and you're in the middle of a snowstorm blizzard. By the time you got out of school, it was 70 degrees. So it was like that, and I loved that. And to me, that was really great, because you always look forward to, okay, this is bad today, but tomorrow could be really great. And I just loved the area, and it was a fantastic area. Did well in the classes, did well in the school. Even had the wife come out for a weekend and showed her what Denver and Colorado was all about. Went in the mountains and everything. So it was a pretty good experience in Denver. Leaving Denver, thought I'd maybe someday go back to Colorado because I liked it so much, but that never worked out. But that's how much I liked it that I thought to myself at the time that, yeah, this would be a neat area to live in.
So loading munitions onto aircraft had to be pretty dangerous. Were you ever worried about dropping a bomb or something going off?
I was never worried about it. I mean, you always knew that there was always a possibility that a bomb would come off of a trailer and clank around on the ramp for a while. But they were pretty well convinced and taught that, bombs coming out of the bomb dump and bombs coming off the trailer and being put onto the wings of an aircraft or into the bomb bay of an aircraft, they weren't fused up at that time. That was the last thing we did, was fuse the bombs up. Until the fuses were installed in the nose of the bomb, they were pretty harmless. And I think at one point we might have had a bomb roll off a trailer and clank around on the concrete. But again, it was pretty harmless at that time. Unless these things are fused up, they're pretty harmless. So, yeah, you're looking at them and you're thinking, yeah, this could be pretty dangerous stuff. But you knew through their study, through their training, that it's all in all. You have to be aware, but as long as you know your job, as long as you do your job, as long as you follow the rules, as long as you go on with the program like they set it out to, it's going to be a pretty safe job.
Cool. So you did 3 months of that training, and then where'd you go?
My first duty station was orders were to Holiday Inn Air Force Base, 49th Tactical Fighter Wing, F-4 Phantoms. Holiday Inn Air Force Base is located in Alamogordo, New Mexico. So called the wife. I says, "That's where we'll be going." She goes, "Where?" She had no idea where Alamogordo, New Mexico is, which is about 100 miles from El Paso, Texas, maybe 100 miles from the Mexican border. Pretty much in the middle of the desert. White Sands National Monument is there, so you can see it's desert and sand, cacti and Gila monsters. So that was my first duty station. Had the wife, went home, got the wife, packed up the bags, packed up the little one, the little girl, and we drove out to Holloman. Lived in a little trailer on some barren trailer court in the middle of the desert. And that was where I started it all, loading weapons on F-4 Phantoms, fighter jets.
Did you like working on the F4?
It had its pluses, it had its minuses. It was a great looking airplane. I loved the looks of it. I was a number 2 man on a 4-man crew, and 4-man crew plus a crew chief. The number 2 man got to do certain things within a load, processes of the load. He was the cockpit man. At some point, you load your weapons, or prior to loading your weapons, the number 2 man goes up in the cockpit, and in coordination with the crew chief, they do certain things, checking out the switches and whatnot, to make sure that electrically this is all going to work once we put it all together. So it's like a pre-flight or preload situation, and I being somebody who loved airplanes, sitting in the cockpit of an F4 Phantom was like, how much better could it get, right? So being a number 2 man, I liked it. The F4 was a very good airplane, workhorse of the Air Force. Originally designed as a fighter bomber, dropping bombs, close air support, that type of stuff, and the Air Force tried to make it into a air-to-air combat fighter, which it had its mixed reviews, but regardless, it was a good airplane, and I loved it. And I loved the looks of it. Didn't like, and sometimes we had to, if you were loading weapons on the center line or underneath the wings, there were a lot of catch points where they had these little tubes that came out of the bottom of the aircraft where you would have released fuel or something, or they were like razors. And so, and it's a really low slung aircraft, very, very low to the ground. So to get under there, you were on your hands and knees. And if these little tubes caught your back, I had probably more than one scar on my back, or one of these tubes would catch you in the back as you were crawling underneath this airplane. So that was the worst part of it, was just getting under it because it was so low. Unlike another one, like through tech school, if you were on an F-105 Thunder Chief, you're working under the wing like this because it was so tall, whereas the F-4 was so low on your hands and knees. So that was the worst part of that whole job, was that. But other than that, it was a good airplane. I mean, I didn't mind it. We had a good crew. I liked the guys on the crew. But yeah, it was good.
So how long were you at this duty station?
I was at Holloman for about 8 months.
And then where'd you go after that?
That's when I started my training for gunship training. But the story leading up to it is probably the real story, which is two things. A, at that point, I liked the airplanes, liked being around them, but I wanted to take the next step. And I wasn't going to be a pilot. I didn't finish college. So I'm thinking to myself, how can I get into the air? Okay. B, a wife and kid living in a dilapidated trailer off base because I didn't have enough rank to be on base. It seems like it's a oxymoron. The lower rank, less money, they shipped you off base. Guys with the stripes and the ratings got on base, where it was a nice little quarters to live in and cheap. So it always amazed me how they came up with this system. Like, take the poor guy with the one stripe on his sleeve, with no rating and no money, with the family, and then ship him 12, 15 miles off base, where you have to pay gas to get to the base. You have to pay rent off the base. And it just never made any sense to me as far as why did they do it that way. The one most in need was shipped off. The one that could afford it, no, we'll keep you right on base. So I guess that's the privilege of rank. But as a one-striper struggling, it didn't make any sense to me. So I was struggling with money. We were to the point where I didn't know if I could make it to the next day. I think with her allotment check and my check every 2 weeks on a monthly basis, we were making $302 a month. Well, by the time you pay for the rent, and if you had a car payment, by the time you paid for your gas back and forth to base every day, or every day you're working, I probably had, and we got paid every 2 weeks, we probably had $25 every 2 weeks to go to the PX to buy food. Now, granted, the PX, you lower prices than is the Piggly Wiggly downtown, but for $25 every 2 weeks to feed a family of 3 or with a little girl, it was tough. You had to, you're pushing your little shopping cart around the PX and you're totaling things up as you go along because all you have is $25 in your pocket, and you're constantly putting things in the cart and taking things out of the cart to make the $25 work. And it got a little discouraging. At the end of 1 week before your next paycheck, you were down to potatoes and noodles. There was no meat. And at one point, we went TDY, I don't know if you know what a TDY is, temporary duty, for a week to Bergstrom Air Force Base in Austin, Texas. They pick up all your airplanes and crew, and went to TDY to Bergstrom to do a firepower demonstration or something. And got back after that week, and they hand me a TDY check. I went, what's that for? Never been at TDY before. Never knew you got TDY pay. So it was a big surprise to me, and they handed me about an $18 check for TDY pay. Well, my eyeballs lit up. It's like, what am I going to do with this $18? It's like winning the lottery. I took it home to our little trailer, and I said, look, Trace, this is $18. What are we going to do with it? So we said, we don't want to make any hasty decisions here. So we took a thumbtack and put it on the inside of the cupboard. He said, we'll look at it for a while before we decide to spend it on what we're going to spend it on, but we'll sit here and admire it for a while. And within 2 days, the clutch went out of my car. I pulled the check off the thumbtack on the inside of the cupboard. Say goodbye to the $18. Easy come, easy go, right? Proceeded to buy me a new clutch plate, and me and my buddy put it in on ourselves. That just shows how bad it was. I mean, we couldn't live. And so I had to make a decision. So I made a decision, well, A, I'm going to get into the air somehow. And B, I'm going to do something to make a little bit more money in this service of mine. So I volunteered for gunship duty, which means if it worked, I would be going to Vietnam. Now, think back. I joined the Air Force to stay out of Vietnam. Now I'm volunteering, basically, for Vietnam. Explain that to the little woman. Go home and explain what you just did. So she wasn't buying it a whole lot. So wait a minute. You told me a year ago you were joining the Air Force to stay out of Vietnam. Now you're telling me you're volunteering to go? Basically? What else am I to do? If I go to Vietnam, you're going home, live with mom and dad. I don't have all them payments of anything, rent. If it works out and I go to Vietnam as a gunner on gunships, I get flight pay, I get combat pay. I can live on that. Well, she really didn't have a whole lot of choice, but she went along with it. So I went back to my crew, and I told them, I said, guys, I got to do something. And so I'm volunteering for Palace Gun. That was the program at the point. It was called Palace Gun. I'm volunteering for Palace Gun. I'm going to be, and hopefully I get picked, and blah blah blah. And I want into the air anyhow. And out of 4 guys on my crew, not counting the crew chief, 2 of my crew members says, you know what? Just like Neil back in the old days, we're going to go down with you and we're going to volunteer too. So the 3 of us go down, put our papers in to volunteer for Palace Gun. That's how you got to be a gunner. You were a weapons mechanic, now you're an airborne weapons mechanic if you go through the program. So 3 of us, we volunteered at the same time. And the 49th Tactical Fighter Wing, which I was at Holloman, is NATO committed. And every fall they go to Germany, pick up the whole wing, airplanes, equipment, crew, put them on planes, fly them to Germany for 30 days and do NATO exercises. So this is about September or so, and we're getting ready to go to Germany. And so I send the wife home because you might as well go home with mom and dad for 30 days. We're going to be gone to Germany for 30 days. So basically, as we're getting ready to pack our bags, get on the plane, get ready to go to Germany, and they come up to me, John, and Joe, my 2 buddies that volunteered for Palace Gun with me. They says, guess what? You guys aren't going to Germany. You got your orders for Palace Gun. So come with me. So went with them, filled out some paperwork. I called the wife. I said, I'm not going to Germany. I'll pack up what we have in the trailer, get it home whenever I can. And 3 of us started our airborne training, which consisted of an immediate assignment to our Cannon Air Force Base for our high altitude chamber. And then we went to our flight school down at Hurlburt Field, Eglin Air Force Base, for 3 months of our flight training. I think we got to go home for a few days. And they sent us to Spokane, Washington, the Fairchild Air Force Base for our basic survival skills training. And then packed up and flew to Clark Air Base in the Philippines for our jungle survival training, which every crew has to go to. If you're going to go, you have to go through those survival schools to be on air crew. And then on to Vietnam, or in this case, NKP, Thailand, where you started your career in Southeast Asia, or started your tour in Southeast Asia. So it all happened really, 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 really fast. I mean, it happened so fast, and they wanted us over there so fast, they even skipped one of our survival schools. So, yeah, you guys won't need water survival. That was supposed to be one of the schools we were supposed to attend down in Florida. Water survival school in case you had to bail out over water, how to get out of the parachute, blah, 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 as you were in the water. And they said, nah, you guys won't be over water anyway. Don't worry about it. We need you over there now. So things were clicking pretty quick. And that's when I got to NKP Thailand.
So what were some of your roles or duty on the gunship then?
I was the official designation would be aerial gunner. My 462 designation, my AFSC, now became A 462. airborne gunner. And we were assigned to the AC-119K Stinger gunships, which really was a surprise to us, because at that time, the big push seemed to be for AC-130 Spectre gunships. So we figured, well, we're going to get Spectre gunships, and when we finally got our orders somewhere along the line, the three of us are looking at, what the hell is one AC-119 Stinger gunship? We had no idea what that was. We figured we're going to get 130s along with everybody else in our classes. They're like, and 130s, and they're looking at us like, we got 130s. What do you guys got? What is a 119? We had no idea. It was a flying boxcar that they reconstituted from the Korean War. A cargo plane that they transformed into a fixed-wing gunship. Just like the AC-130s, but maybe not as powerful, maybe not as sophisticated, but definitely a stopgap that they needed, because they were having troubles with the AC-130 from an R&D standpoint, and they needed something to fill that gap between the AC-47 Puff the Magic Dragon spooky gunships until the AC-130s could get 100% online. They needed something in between, and that's where we came in, AC-119Ks, which were an upgunned version of the AC-119Gs. The Gs were called the Shadow gunship. The Ks were called the Stinger gunship. The Shadow gunship, which was the first stopgap, had 4 miniguns on it, 6-barrel rotating miniguns. And they said, well, that's good, but we need more firepower because those Shadows can't fly the trail on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Those miniguns are 7.62 millimeter. They do no good against trucks. Okay, and the truck interdiction on the Ho Chi Minh Trail was the primary concern at that time. So they said, okay, we'll take that AC-119G Shadow and we'll add 220 millimeters to it, 6-barrel rotating cannons, and then that'll at least give us enough firepower to go fly the Ho Chi Minh Trail and hunt a few trucks. So the K was a upgunned version of the G Shadow. On each K version, each Stinger version, there were 3 gunners. A total crew of 10, pilot, co-pilot, navigators, sensor operators, an illuminator operator, and 3 gunners. Total crew of 10. The 3 gunners basically prepped the guns on the ground before takeoff. We made sure that they were all in working order and up to snuff and ready to go. Got all your ammunition ready, correct, and ready. Made sure everything was on board the way it should be. We didn't have to load any of the ammunition on board. They had the ground weapons mechanics, weapons people doing that for us. We showed up off the crew truck, boarded the plane, and started doing our pre-flight prep. Once we took off, again, we would do more preps once we were in the air, make sure the guns were ready to go. So we had 3 gunners, 6 guns, 4 miniguns, 2 20 millimeter Gatling guns, 4 in the middle miniguns with the 2 Gatling guns on each end, in the cargo compartment on the left side of the aircraft. Once we started to approach target, we would start arming the guns. As gunners, we would make sure that they were all loaded, all complete, everything's checked out, ready to go, and waited for us to roll in on target. Of course, we're on the intercom through our headsets and helmets, so we knew where we were at and what we were ready to do, just by conversations between the navigators and sensor operators and the pilots and co-pilots. We knew we were getting close and getting things ready. So when we roll in on target, and maybe one of the sensor operators picked up some trucks on the trail, says, okay, pilot, we got this and this, let's roll in on certain this and that, and they had all their things figured out. and the pilot would shoot his guns through his sight that was on the left side of the control column as he's flying it. So we didn't actually shoot the guns. It was all fixed within the parameters of the electronics and fed through the computers into the pilot's gun sight, and he actually pulled the trigger. But when he was ready to roll in, he would make sure gunner's gun's hot, give me as many guns, depending on what type of mission we were on. If we were on a trail mission, he'd want the 20 millimeters ready. If we were on a TIC, which is a TIC, Troops in Contact type mission, probably more than likely start with the miniguns. And so he would tell you what we're ready to shoot at, what guns he wanted online, which guns he wanted hot. Maybe he only wanted one of the 20s versus two of the 20s, which one he wanted. So we would get everything ready. He would roll in on his target, and he would pull the trigger and expend the ammunition. Sometimes he wasn't seeing what he wanted to see in his gun sights because he might have been off a little bit, and he wanted to check the azimuth, elevations, degradations of the guns, and we could adjust those on the fly as we needed as he was shooting. And if he felt it was right in my pipper but I'm a little bit off, so check the elevation of this one gun, and we could adjust that on the fly. Obviously, each gun, as you expended the ammunition out of the barrel, out of the drum, you might have to shut that gun down, tell the pilot, okay, go to number 220, number 1 is empty, and in flight, over the trail, in the dark, flying at a 30-degree bank, you had to either fix the gun if it was broke, or try to fix it if it was broke, or in this case, if you were out of ammunition in that particular drum, you had racks and racks and racks of ammunition in cans, and you linked it all together and reloaded the gun as he was maybe still flying and picking out his targets with the other guns. So it was an in-flight repair, minor repair, because there wasn't a whole lot we could do, major repair on guns, and in-flight refueling, rearming as he was expending his ammunition. Because you're probably talking around, we had on board probably 200,000 rounds of ammunition that we could keep reloading and reloading and reloading. So that was our primary job, keeping the guns online for the pilot, and then rearming them as he was expending the ammo, depending on what guns he was using. And that was for 2 of the gunners. The third gunner, and this changed from mission to mission, and it rotated amongst the gunners, he would stand on the left side, left rear door of the cargo compartment. I say door, but it used to be a door, but there is no door. It's just an opening. And we had the big searchlight in that opening. Although we never used a searchlight. In my 120 missions, we never used a searchlight. It kind of give your location away, if you know what I mean, in a dark sky, and you had this big searchlight flying around. So we never used it. But regardless, the third gunner would be, and this was usually designated before the flight, who was going to be the scanner. So he would take his position before you hit the target area in that left rear door, situated between the searchlight and getting yourself comfortable, strapping yourself in, so if you fell out the door for one reason or another, they could pull you back in. And basically the job of that person, the responsibility of that person was to scan the area below you, look for muzzle flashes of guns being fired at you. And when the AAA anti-aircraft artillery starts coming up at you, which was tracers, you could see them, letting the pilot know, or co-pilot know, we have muzzle flashes at 9 o'clock. We have tracer 9 o'clock. Not close. Don't worry about it. No sweat. Or AAA at 7 o'clock, brake hard right, because it's coming in on us. So he would have to roll out of that orbit that he's in, a 30-degree bank, and make a hard right, if that's what we called, to avoid the AAA, to avoid being hit. Sometimes, or most times, it worked. Sometimes some planes couldn't get out of the way, and that's when they took battle damage. So the third gunner, that was his primary job, of being able to call the AAA to the pilot, and it was a situation where if you called a brake left or a brake right, the pilot wasn't going to ask you how close, or is it kind of close, or is it... No. It was an order. There was an order from the scanner to the pilot that it's on us now, and he didn't mess around. He didn't ask no questions. And it wasn't a nice, easy bank out of it to avoid. No. It was a boom. And you might be in a 30-degree left bank, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a 60-degree right bank immediately. Needless to say, in the cargo compartment, you were hanging on, because it wasn't an easy maneuver, wasn't meant to be an easy maneuver. It was to avoid something that can hurt you. If you're one of the other two gunners with a 75-pound can of ammunition that you're taking out of the rack and ready to load into the gun, and you start pulling those type of G's, positive G's, you're going down to your knees. You couldn't help it. You were going down, unless somehow you could prepare for that break. And if you could hear it and maybe prepare yourself and grab onto something, otherwise it was going to take you down to the floor. And I don't know how many times I ended up on my knees in the middle of a break, almost swallowing my flashlight, because that was the only thing we had, was a little Sanyo rechargeable flashlight. It was the only light that we worked by, because it was all dark. And you carried it in your mouth. And I still have mine with the teeth marks in it. I don't know how many times I almost swallowed that thing. But it was pretty violent. Even though you might not be taking battle damage at that particular point, the whole maneuver of it was pretty violent. So that was the jobs. Those jobs of the three gunners. You know, the IO, eliminator operator, he scanned out of the right side, right rear door. And the scanner, the third gunner, he scanned out of the left rear door. And then everybody else had their jobs, scopes, starlight scopes, screens and whatnot that they were doing. But that was our job, and we were in our own little world back there. And but that's what we did.
So how long were you in Thailand?
A year. Now, I was in Thailand. That was where our main base was. 18th Special Operations Squadron was attached to the 56th Special Operations Wing. 56th SAO was main base was in Nakhon Phanom, Thailand. So that's where we flew out of. But the 18th Special Operations Squadron also had detachments in Da Nang, Vietnam, and Bien Hoa, Vietnam. Detachment 1, Detachment 2. So the system they came up with was you fly out of NKP, Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, for 30 days. Then you rotate to Da Nang for 30 days. and then you rotate down to Benoit for 30 days and fly out of there. So you were on a constant rotation. 30 here, 30 here, 30 here, and then back to start. Back to the start. Fly out of there, 30, 30, 30. So I was in Thailand probably 1/3 of my 1 year. I was in Da Nang 1/3 of the 1 year, and Benoit the same. I'm not sure why they did that. Other than getting the crews different environments. I don't know if it was a psychological thing, that they didn't want you complacent. I'm not sure if that, because like if you're flying out in the Confidant, Thailand, your two primary targets were in Steel Tiger, which is the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, or the Ho Chi Minh Trail further up north in the PDG, what they call the PDJ, the Plain of Jars, barrel roll. Those missions were pretty tough. The North Vietnamese, that supply line was very important to them. And they had AAA and aircraft artillery all around, all through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So when you were flying the trail, you were going to get shot at. No doubt about it. And some of the toughest missions were those two areas to fly in. If you were up in a PDJ, you got cold because you were flying basically in the mountains, the karsts as they call them. Flights were longer. You might get called off of the trail if there was a troops in contact type of situation, but mostly it was a trail work, and it was the toughest of the different environments that you had to be in and fly in. However, NKP, Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, had the best facilities. You had the best barracks. You had the best chow hall. The amenities were great. You had a swimming pool. You had an outdoor theater. You had other things you could do if you weren't flying, particularly that day, that you could do. It was a nice area. But the missions were the worst. So it was a trade-off. You get sent to Da Nang, the missions weren't as bad. A lot of troops in contact, because now you're in Vietnam. A lot of times you were called in on TIC missions, perimeter defense. But the conditions were crappy. The chow hall sucked, the barracks sucked. Big old rats running around with cockroaches and you name it. Just sucked. And you add the fact that when you weren't flying, the chances of you getting rocketed that night were probably pretty good. They called Da Nang Rocket City. And there's a reason for it. Not because of the rockets we were letting go, because of the rockets that were coming in every night. And they would lob in these 122 millimeter rockets onto the base, and I would rather be flying and getting shot at than sitting there in your barracks not knowing if the next 122 was going to come through your ceiling. So the conditions sucked. But missions that when you were flying were not so bad. Okay. Again, a trade-off, right? You go down to Benoit, which is closer to Saigon, southern. It was probably a combination of the two. Conditions weren't the best, but they weren't the worst. Missions weren't the worst, but they weren't the best. So it was kind of like a in-between, flying out of Benoit. So I think that was their intentions of, okay, we don't want you stuck at NKP all the time getting the worst type of missions. But we don't want you in Da Nang all the time with the worst kind of conditions on the ground. So it was kind of like a mind game I think they were playing with you as far as to give you a little bit of a break, to change things around. I could be wrong. I don't know. Nobody ever gave me a positive 100% reason of why they did that. It was only my read, my personal view of why they did that, which isn't a bad thing. It was a good thing. Gives you a little bit of different. Now, maybe it was different for different guys and they thought of it a different way. I don't know, but I didn't mind it so bad. It's just funny because you go down to Benoit and you're flying out of Benoit, and I like I said, it's a combination of both. Wasn't the worst type of missions, wasn't the worst type of conditions, and vice versa. But probably the worst mission I ever flew out, toughest mission I flew out of, was out of Benoit. So, that's another story. But
Do you want to go into that?
well, yeah, I guess I could go into it. The publicity of Vietnam was the toughest was obviously Tet of '68. When they made that big push, North Vietnamese made that big push, Easter offensive of '68. Most people don't realize there was a Tet of '72 also, which is when I was over there. They made that push. It may not have been as massive as '68, but it was hard, and they were going to make a hard push to gain as much ground as they could before any treaties or anything else were signed. So there was a Tet of '72, and I was flying out of Benoit. Our crew was flying out of Benoit, and there's a little town north of Benoit called An Lac. A lot of stories written about An Lac. And it was under siege. So they were flying our planes around the clock over An Lac to try to save the city or the town, the village. And the GIs, the military, and everybody else that was getting under a lot of pressure. The key point of that is 24-hour coverage. We were meant for night flying. We roamed the trail at night. We worked at night. 24-hour coverage means daylight. Imagine from the bottom looking up, big black airplane, painted black, flying nominal speed in a firing orbit at a fixed altitude with a beautiful bright blue sky behind it as a backdrop.
I stuck out pretty good.
Who's that good for? Is that good for us, or is that good for them?
Definitely not you.
Okay, not for me, not for us. Couple that with the fact that, and I was scanning that day, that beautiful morning, that my success of calling AAA was none to zero. Because the AAA comes at you and tracers, which are at night looks like fireworks, which you could see muzzle flashes even before the tracers that they're firing at you. Everything points to it's a good thing, because if you can see it, you can try to do something about it. In the daylight, guess what? You don't see muzzle flashes. You can't see tracer. And the best I could do was tell the pilot, co-pilot, I can't see it, I can hear it as it's flying by you, crackling. And the co-pilot's yelling back at me, yeah, it just went by my window here. I said, I can't call it. I can't see it, I can't call it. And it was bad. just a lot of situations where you just didn't feel very comfortable at that point in time. It's just not good. But we did our best. We rolled in on our targets, and we because most of that was troops in contact type stuff, guys on the ground that were hurting in bad shape. So when our time on target was over, limited by either fuel or ammunition, no more ammunition, we pulled off. And generally, when you're pulling off target, there's one coming in. It's a constant rotation, scheduled. So we pulled off target. We were done. We were bingo fuel, Winchester ammunition, done. We're going back, and here comes the next one. And to this day, I remember the conversation over the intercom of our people telling their people, it's not good. This is very bad. Be careful. If you don't like it, get the hell out. Well, we were out of our environment. Simple. By the time we landed, they were shot down. By the time we were wheels down and got into the briefing, post-op brief, post-flight brief, they were already shot down. And we lost 3 crew members that day. 7 got out. 7 were rescued. 7 bailed out. 7 were picked up by various people, from Army helicopters to whoever was available. But 3 did not. The aircraft commander of that aircraft was named Terry Courtney, captain. He flew it into the ground basically so the others could get out. He was put in for the Medal of Honor, did not get it, but did receive the Air Force Cross, which is the second highest award. But basically he gave up his life because it was going to flip over on his back, and nobody would have gotten out if he hadn't stayed at the controls and basically flew it to the ground. But 7 did get out, and all 3 gunners got out. They lost it, 1 navigator, the pilot, and the IO, illuminator operator. So that was a tough time. To know that after we got down and hearing that they went down, we know what they went through. I know what they went through. I know that, I don't know who was scanning, it was Craig Corbett or whoever it was, gunner, probably couldn't see it also. And no matter you try to warn somebody, no matter what you do, you try to complete the mission best of your ability, and I'm sure that's what they were trying to do, because it was a bad situation on the ground and it didn't work out. So that was so even though Benoit was like a in between types of missions, it ended up literally probably the worst mission, toughest mission I ever flew. But we came out of it. They did, we did. And it's tough. When we have our annual reunions, our 18th Special Operations Squadron, you know, we try to commemorate the ones that we lost in our squadron and pay special tribute to them. And it's still tough 50 years later, you know.
How was it for you coming back home?
I don't know. You know, it's like mentally, I don't think I had that much of a problem, other than the fact that I was going to be off of flight status, and I didn't like that. So that was my mental hurdle that I had to get over. I was doing what I wanted to do, and now I was going to be back on the ground loading weapons, and I didn't want to be doing that. But so that was a mental hurdle. A physical hurdle was tremendous. You know, my 2 buddies that volunteered with me, we were all leaving on the same day. They were leaving. they were sending us home a week early, a week shy of a year or so we could get home for Christmas, or a week or two shy of a year. And I remember all three of us being in the barracks when they delivered our orders, and John Wolf, he's from Council Bluffs, Iowa, opens up his orders, and he's going to Nellis Air Force Base, Las Vegas, Nevada. And he's happier than get out. Joe Grushinsky from Scranton, PA, opens up his orders, Nellis Air Force Base, Las Vegas, Nevada. Happier than get out. And they're high-fiving it and jumping on the bed and running around the room. And, all right, we're going to Vegas and all this other stuff. And I'm thinking, well, I've been with these guys for like 2.5 years. I mean, joined at the hip, right? I'm going to Vegas, right? No. I opened up my orders. I'm going to Grand Forks, North Dakota. Strategic Air Command. Cannot get any worse than that. If you're in the military, you don't want to be in SAC. If you're in the military, you don't want to be in SAC in Grand Forks, North Dakota in December. You ever been to Grand Forks, North Dakota in December?
I have not.
When I left Thailand, it was 98 above. When I got to Grand Forks in December, it was minus 30. Grown man cry? You'd have seen it. So physically, that was a challenge. Going to Grand Forks, loading nuclear weapons on B-52s. Wasn't my cup of tea at that point. So that's how it was going back. I had a mental thing because I wasn't in the air, and another physical thing because this is really physical. It's a change. Now I'm telling my wife, well, last place I took you was in the middle of a desert. Now I get to take you into the middle of the Arctic tundra, 100 miles from Canada. So that didn't go over well with her, but again, she was a trooper.
So how long were you at this base?
My last 18 months, 2 winters. I measure it in winters. I don't know how many months, 2 winters.
Hey, that's enough. Kind of running a little short on time here, and you've covered quite a bit, and you pretty much answered all the questions without me having to ask.
Oh, okay.
So I only have a couple left here. Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
No, I think that pretty much does it, other than the fact that when it came time for my re-enlistment interview with the little lieutenant there, I had expected just talk to my squadron clerk, typist, that works in his little office 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I asked him what he got for his re-enlistment bonus, and he said $6,000. And I'm thinking, wow, $6,000 was so much money back then. I said, this is fantastic. I said, I wanted to re-enlist. And when I got into my re-enlistment interview, the first thing I asked the second lieutenant was, what's my re-enlistment bonus? And he looks it up on a clipboard and goes, $1,000. Well, my jaw dropped. I said, what? He said, yeah, you're 462 weapons. We don't need you anymore, basically. You're surplus. The war is over, and you're pretty much surplus. And that kind of deflated me, because we were on 24-hour call, training. I was on a training crew that trained other crews on the nuclear missiles. Middle of the night, midnight was the only time we could get a training airplane in minus 30-degree weather, minus 50 below or below, wind chills. And I'm going to get $1,000, and it hurt my feelings, to say it mildly. And then I said, well, okay, can I get back in the air? I said, let me transfer it to a gunner on 130s, C-130, AC-130s. No, don't need him. War's over. That was about his attitude. Who probably knew nothing. He probably could have looked at it, and really, if he was interested in it, maybe could have looked into it for me. I said, well, look out your window. There's B-52s out there. They have gunners. Yeah, those aren't mechanical. Those are electronic fields. So, let me try cross-train. I can do electronics. Yeah, maybe we can make it. Maybe we can let you cross-train. Just sign on this dotted line first for 4 more years, and I'll look into it. No guarantee, right? No guarantee. I don't think so. I'm out. But I wanted to join. I wanted to re-enlist. I wanted to get back in the air. I wanted to do a lot of things. I had it all figured out. Making rank, I had medals up the ass. You're allowed at that time 25 points, maximum points. Each medal was worth a point, certain point value. You were allowed 25 points to promotion. I knew guys that were missing promotion by half a point. They had no medals. I had to jump 25-point jump start on anybody else, and I knew how to take their tests. I would have had Chief Master Sergeant in 12 years. I had it figured out. And I wanted to re-enlist. I just wanted back in the air. And they wouldn't work with me. It was like, you're surplus. And I said, well, that's when I got out. But that was left with a kind of a bitter taste, because I just felt if I had the right lieutenant give me the right interview, maybe things would have worked out different, but it didn't.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, my only last question is, what message would you like to leave for future generations who review this interview?
Military's great. I loved it. Didn't work out for me past 4 years. I wouldn't trade the 4 years for anything. It was the best time of my life. Maybe not financially, but from a standpoint of being a part of something, being a standpoint of somebody who myself liked structure your life. I enjoyed my 4 years, and so much so that I wanted to continue it, but it didn't work out for me. But don't be afraid of it. Take it and love it, because I thought it was great. And the people you meet, and the camaraderie you develop, you'll never get that anywhere else. You're not going to find that on your high school football team, even though you think you might. You're not going to find it on your softball team or anything. You're not going to find it at your workplace, working behind your desk. The only way you're going to find it is working with a crew or somebody that you know your life depends on them. Or you might find it like in firefighters or police department or something like that. But the military, that's where you're going to get that experience, and there's no price tag on that.
Well, this concludes our interview. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this interview, and thank you for your service.
You're very welcome.